Abi Hawa, Abi Hawa, Ruganawa. Abi Hawa, Ruganawa, Abi Hawa. Abi Hawa, Ruganawa, Abi Hawa, Ruganawa. Abi Hawa.
Yawam Tawab. Our good day, everyone. Welcome to another fact-filled episode of our Hebrew Recovery series. Our story today begins after the Great Fall of Rome in 476 AD by General Odysseus of the Goths. Shortly after the Great Fall of Caucasianized Rome, the Dark Ages or Middle Ages emerged. In 711 AD, the Moors took over Hispania and defeated Roderick, the last Visigoth king. Many Christians remained under Moorish control, while others relocated to the north outside Moorish jurisdiction. Later in 1085 AD, Toledo was recaptured from the Moors by Alfonso VI, and in 1492, Granada was defeated and the Moors and the Sephardi Jews were expelled from Spain. Our next article, Who Were the Moors?, was produced by the National Geographic. Let's start at the concept Moors has been used to describe alternatively the reign of Muslims in Spain, Europeans of African descent, and others for centuries. Derived from the Latin word Maurus, the term was originally used to describe Berbers and other people from the ancient Roman province of Mauritania in what is now North Africa. Over time, it was increasingly applied to Muslims living in Europe. Beginning in the Renaissance, Moor and Blackamoor were also used to describe any person with dark skin. Our next reference is coming from the online etymology dictionary. We're taking a more in-depth look at the word Moor. North African Berber, one of the race dwelling in the Barbary late 14th century, from Old French Moor, from medieval Latin Moras, from the Latin Maras, inhabitant of Mauritania, Roman Northwest Africa, a region now corresponding to the northern Algeria and Morocco. From Greek Maros, perhaps a native name or else cognate with Maras, black. Also applied to the Arabic conquerors of Spain, being a dark people in relation to Europeans, their name in the Middle Ages were a synonym for Negro. Later, 16th century through 17th century. Back to our National Geographic article, in 711 AD, a group of North African Muslims led by the Berber general Tariq ibn Ziyad captured the Iberian Peninsula, modern Spain and Portugal. Over time, the strength of the Muslim state diminished, creating inroads for Christians who resented Moorish rule. For centuries, Christian groups challenged Muslim territorial dominance in Al-Andalus and slowly expanded their territory. This culminated in 1492 when Catholic monarchs Ferdinand II and Isabella I won the Granada War and completed Spain's conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. Eventually, the Moors were expelled from Spain. By then, the idea of Moors had spread across Western Europe. Moor came to mean anyone who, Muslim or had dark skin. Occasionally, Europeans would distinguish between Blackamoors and White Moors. Next, let's discuss the expulsion of the Afro-Asiatic Hebrews of Spain in 1492. Our next literary reference is coming from Ronald Sanders' book titled Lost Tribes and Promised Lands. The long Portuguese tradition of tolerance towards Jews had come to an end even before 1492. In 1481, the Cortes of Évora had given King John II official notice of a groundswell of popular anti-Semitism that he could no longer ignore. Members' complaint about Jews ranged from obstination in dress to tax farming and to Jewish artisans, tailors, shoemakers, and the like who, they said, entered rural Christian homes under the pretext of doing their work, but then tried to seduce the women while the men were out in the fields. The king agreed to legislation curbing Jewish sumptuary habits and reviving the ancient and hitherto long forgotten requirement that Jews wear an identifying badge on their clothing. The arrival of a huge Jewish refugee population in 1492 was therefore more than the king could put up with. Although he could not resist the opportunity to fill his coffers by charging away arrivals a large entrance fee, but he would not allow them to stay and made March 31st, 1493, the deadline for their departure. When the time came, many of the Jewish refugees pushed on to North Africa and elsewhere, but others stayed to put this unwanted Portuguese severity to the test. The threatened penalty was enslavement to the Portuguese crown, an ambiguous status that may even have seemed to promise advantages in the eyes of some Jews. But the king dashed any such sanguine expectations, commanding, according to the royal chronicler Roy de Pina, that all who were minors, youths and girls alike, were to be taken captive from among those Castilian Jews in his kingdom who did not betake themselves away within the appointed time according to the conditions of their entrance. All these children were forcibly converted to Christianity and sent to the island of San Tomé in the Gulf of Guinea, which had been discovered by Portuguese ships a little over 20 years earlier, insomuch that being separated, they would reasonably be better Christians. And it was as a result of this that the island came to be more densely populated, and on account of this, it began to thrive exceedingly. Let's stop here. The sugarcane crop in Africa on the island of San Tomé was owned and operated by the Congolese. This warlike African nation went into a partnership with the Portuguese. In exchange, the Portuguese started to send Indo-European dark nation people of Europe to work the sugarcane crop. The children of the Afro-Asiatic Hebrews of Portugal in 1493 were sent to San Tomé. Eventually, the sugarcane crop of the Congolese/Portuguese would bring forth slave towns in West Africa. Eventually, these slave towns would become ports for the transatlantic slave trade in Western Africa. Let's finish our reading selection from The Lost Tribes and Promised Lands. Indeed, it was derived so well that by the middle of the next century, it would be the most important entrepot between the African mainland and the New World for the transatlantic slave trade. This is not the only instance of the persecuted being turned into persecutors during the course of that cruel age. Our next story takes us to the Stuarts of England of 1600 through the 1700s. The Stuarts were the Negroid royal families of Europe of the 1600s. The Stuart kings were the first kings of the United Kingdom. King James VI of Scotland also became first king of England, the same King James that commissioned the King James Bible of 1611, thus combining the two thrones for the first time. The Stuarts were believed to be of the Negroid/Black royal families that ruled Scotland/England. The Stuart dynasty reigned in England and Scotland from 1603 to 1714, a period which saw a flourishing court culture, but also much upheaval of instability, of plague, fire, and war. The following is the true depiction of King James. The next depiction is a Caucasianized picture of King James found on Wiki. This book includes a wealth of travel accounts and diaries, histories of nations from throughout the world, and maps and charts of a world that was still being discovered. The original copy was written by John Mackey, Esquire, published in 1773 by his son, Spring Mackey, Esquire. Our first person is Charles Lennox, Duke of Richmond, is son to the King Charles II by the Duchess of Portsmouth. He was carried by his mother into France in the reign of King James, and left France in the reign of King William when he declared himself for a religion and constitution of his country. He is a gentleman, good-natured to a fault, very well bred, and have many valuable things in him, is an enemy to business, very credulous, well-shaped, black complexion, much like King Charles, not 30 years old. Our next two images reflects a description of a Caucasianized images of Charles Lennox, 1st Duke of Richmond. These two pictures does not reflect from the description of the memoirs of the Secret Services of John Mackey, Esquire. Our next person is Charles Beauclerk, the Duke of St. Albans. His son to King Charles II by Miss Gwynn was made by King William, one of the bedchamber, and captain of the band of the pensioners, and sent by the king to France to congratulate the marriage of Duke of Burgundy. He is a gentleman every way, de bon naturel, well bred, doth not love business, is well affected to the constitution of his country. He is of a black complexion, not so tall as the Duke of Northumberland, yet very like King Charles, turned of 30 years old. Next up is Charles Fitzroy, the Duke of Grafton, is grandson to King Charles II, and son to the heirs of Bennet, Earl of Arlington. Is a very pretty gentleman, hath been abroad in the world, zealous for the constitution of his country. A tall black man, about 25 years old. Our next pictures are the Caucasianized depictions of Charles Beauclerk and Charles Fitzroy. Once again, these Caucasianized images does not reflect from the reference material we just read from. Remember, this reading material came from the late 1700s. Someone once referred to this type of reading material as for white eyes only. Lastly, our last person is Earl Daniel, 2nd Earl of Nottingham. It's the eldest son to Mr. Finch, Lord Chancellor in the reign of King Charles II. Let's skip to here. He have also the exterior air of business and application enough to him, very capable, in his habit and manners very formal. A tall, thin, very black man, like a Spaniard or Jew, about 50 years old. In this last line of text, it referred to Spaniards and Jews as being black or Negroid during the 1700s. Before we close out today's lesson, hopefully what you have learned is that there is an untold history of Black excellency. However, at Karaya Kahal, we can't confirm that all the players in today's lesson were descendants of the Afro-Asiatic Hebrew Israelite families. However, we can confirm that the Negroid people of earlier Europe and Africa made a historical impact. At Karaya Kahal, we encourage all people to brush up and read history books published before the 1900s. Books that were written before the 1900s may give a better account to history as it happened in the past. Bahashama Mashakawashai. Barakatha.